Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Slingshot from levees.org. Our mission is to provide commentary and coverage on the things that matter most to you, our listeners. You all know me, Sandy Rosenthal, and joining me today is Mr. Rudy Vorkapik and Mr. Stuart Loeb. Rudy Vorkapik, originally from Chicago, came to New Orleans the year prior to Katrina. He founded and produced a satirical newspaper called The Levee with the mantra, "We hold nothing back." It's the first newspaper to call out the Army Corps of Engineers for the flooding during Hurricane Katrina. Stuart Loeb is an engineer who followed levee.org and The Levee and has been motivated ever since. And today we're going to be discussing FEMA and how it is unprepared for hurricane season, which starts very, very soon. FEMA is, of course, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So without any further ado, Stuart, how about you? How would you like to kick this off?
Well, FEMA, the new director of FEMA, was quoted, and I saw this in a social media quote. It was an apt comparison to Bubba Gump, because the FEMA director came out and said he had no idea of the breadth of the coverage that FEMA had. It's hurricanes, earthquakes, floods. He goes through a whole list, and he gets to the punchline. He says, and even volcanoes. How about that? And it's kind of breathtaking that a director of the agency in charge of aid to the people who are affected by these disasters is surprised that these disasters exist. Where did you get this guy? And more importantly, why did you qualify him to be director? We can get into that later, but it's gobsmacking that this is the director of FEMA now. And on the backside of that, you have to look at the denial of claims in Arkansas and in North Carolina. There's some real changes to FEMA that are happening now, as opposed to what I think, Sandy, you may want to comment on this, a slow inattention or decay that was occurring in the previous administration.
I can jump right in and point out we all remember Brownie, heck of a job, Brownie, who was also similarly to now inappropriately named as head of the agency, and he obviously didn't understand what his job was about and what he was supposed to do, and unfortunately for him, ended up being in charge of one of really what is termed as one of the worst catastrophes in the history of in the recent history, second only to Chernobyl. So, and then a lot of people said that he was scapegoated, and there may be some truth to that. Uh, in the case of the administration at that time, all the focus was on terrorist attacks and away from hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanoes and things like that. So it's like a deja vu from 20 years ago. The only other thing I'm going to add is FEMA is also in charge of setting our flood insurance rates, or is directly involved. Maybe it doesn't do it by itself, but provides the information to the National Flood Insurance Program, and that affects every single person in the country, whether or not you live where you have hurricanes or floods. It affects everybody. Anyway, excuse me, Rudy, you look like you have something to say.
I can't get the second only to Chernobyl out of my head. If you're going to roll with the big dogs, right? Of course, our cuisine still is much better than Chernobyl's. So if you're planning a getaway, please come here. But oh, that's great. Second only to Chernobyl. We've got.
They'll challenge you with borscht on that, but
you know what? Yeah. The borscht I had here last week was terrible. You're right, Stuart. Absolutely. But speaking of bad borscht, FEMA, its own audits, their own audits are saying that they're not ready. They're just not ready for 2025. There's staff shortages, low morale, and mostly no coordination with the states. And the whole plan was for the states to take over all of the disaster reactions. And it's just you know we're we are this is a glaring example again of us flying by the seat of our pants. We have no idea what's going to happen. There is boy everybody in the country who's nervous about this and about every other thing should now know what it's like to live in New Orleans, where we live for today. There's not a lot of planning for tomorrow because A, you don't know what the weather's going to be like, and B, you don't know what the weather's going to be like. So the point being is that when you have such uncertainty every single day of your life, that's what it's like living in New Orleans. So welcome.
That especially at this time of year. I can give you an actual example of how coordination matters. So I think few people can argue that one of the biggest problems during the flooding during Katrina is communication was down,
Yeah.
100% down. And believe it or not, all of that could have been avoided had there just been proper communication. It turns out that there was a tractor trailer, two trailers long, with a
Yeah.
cell tower that could have been ramped up and turned on for first response personnel. I mean, not for the whole city to use, who was here
Right.
obviously, but for first responders. Okay, the
Right.
police, the rescue. That truck sat in Baton Rouge for a week just because of miscommunication. One person ordered it and another person canceled it. Michael Brown ordered it, another person canceled it, and it sat in Baton Rouge for a week. Meanwhile, Walmart made it here with water. CNN made it here. I mean, all these other trucks made it here, but the one truck we needed most, the one with the cell tower on it, it was called Red October, never made it. And imagine had that cell tower made it here, there would have been no shooting on the bridge.
On the bridge.
Help me here, the terrible
Danziger.
shooting.
Danziger.
Danziger Bridge. I knew it started with a Dan. Danziger
Yeah.
Bridge. There probably would have been no standoff when survivors just wanted to cross the Crescent City Bridge into West Wego, and they were held back with policemen with guns. Communication was 100% down. Well, anyway, my point is all of that could have been avoided with proper coordination and proper communication between FEMA and the state.
Sure.
Mhm.
Sure. And then on top of that, don't forget everything else is going to get cut. I mean, now they're proposing to cut Medicaid, proposing to cut. I mean, there's really everything's getting cut, but there's no plan. And that's the problem. That's the problem. There's no plan.
Can we back this train up a couple of stops and go
Cheers.
back to the states' control or states taking responsibility like it's something that is like telling a child to be responsible for their own food and shelter, making the states responsible for disaster response. The idea behind disaster response is rooted in the broader concept of insurance. It's an insurance policy from the government that your specific area is covered by the resources that are available to the whole country. And when you separate states, make them responsible for their own disasters. I believe California and New York will be okay with that, but Louisiana,
Yeah.
whatever its legislative leaders may think, is in no position to fund disaster relief on its own. And why this isn't creating an outcry among our federal representatives in the House and the Senate, like John Kennedy, people like that, why they aren't outraged about that. We can't take responsibility for this. We rely already on the federal government giving us more money than we send in. And when it comes to a disaster, that is the whole idea behind FEMA and a federated government. So it's they it's not that they look like they're doing this. They've actually said it. It's come words out of the president's mouth. We're giving this back to the states, like it's a decision like abortion or something. That's a local issue that the locals can decide how to respond to it. That's not how disasters work.
So you're saying, yeah.
If I may, Rudy, a lot of people I get asked all the time, why is it that the lower ninth ward and this is relevant, is the last region to come back, and they still haven't come back after the flooding during Katrina. And there were two main reasons. One is the flooding of the Lower Ninth Ward was of the worst flooding. The Niagara Falls that came through that industrial canal was quite large. But the other reason is the Lower Ninth Ward is a lower to middle class homeowners who don't have that cushion of large savings. Didn't have these cushions of having family with a buffer of savings. These people, for many of these people, their home was their assets. And so my point is, these are the communities that are least able to help themselves in the case of disaster. And I'll go ahead and say it. I believe that our senator, especially Senator Kennedy, doesn't really care because those are the communities that need FEMA most, not the communities that have they see a hurricane coming, they fly in their jet to pick them up and take them out. Okay, I'll leave it with that.
Or yeah, they go off to Cancun. Sure. No,
Yep, yep.
the other, the other aspect of FEMA not being ready, I mean, that's gonna. I mean, I hate to think of how much time and what we might have to go through for this to happen, but having been through it twice in my life in a major way, being from Chicago originally in 1977, there was a giant snowstorm, and the mayor at that time, Michael Blandick, was not ready for that snowstorm, and that snowstorm swept him completely right out of office, and it was a dramatic telling. It's a national story. It was a national story for how be prepared for the worst of the worst, and if you're not, then you're going to pay the price. And Katrina, it happened a lot that way with George Bush. I mean, he had to wear that Katrina anchor around his neck. I mean, that's not a great way to put it, but it's the truth. I mean, he was derided for his response and what he tried to pull off here. And so now here
And
we
Governor
go.
Blanco was not exactly a shining beacon of leadership
Not
at
at
that
all,
time
not at
either.
all. I was sticking, yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt there was a plan. I'm still surprised they haven't named that President Trump hasn't named either Ray Nagin or Michael Brown as FEMA director yet. I mean, to boil it down, if we're going to pick
Well,
crazy people, go crazy, man, go crazy. So I mean, but now, like Stuart, like you said, we've got a guy in there now that's like looking around at everything that's going on, like, wow, this is really big. Like the little kid that just got to the roller coaster and realized this is scary. And but that's what we're dealing with right now. So we're dealing with, unfortunately, I think one of the reasons why people aren't responding, and I think this is an important part of what we need to talk about is because I don't think it's actually really, really hit them yet. I think it's close. I think it's coming. And I think when they feel it, things are going to change. But right now, I think everything is ebbing and flowing within the hour of approval ratings, of hatred, of likability, of all of it. And why aren't the GOP still aren't saying anything? Because he's still providing them cover, because they don't have to pass a law, because all he's doing is signing executive orders, so they don't have to stand behind anything. And I think they're thinking they're going to prop him up for the big fall and get their other guy in there, whomever they would like, that someone they can deal with, and who doesn't just deal with them.
I
That's
speaking
agree
of
ultimately what
with
I
you.
passing
see
laws,
happening. Pardon me? Yes.
speaking of passing laws, the Congress has passed five. You can count them on one hand. Five bills this year. It's the lowest number since a century ago for an incoming Congress under this administration.
That is.
They're trying to govern by executive order. What you're talking about, Rudy, is what I call the Joe McCarthy moment. When does that happen? I don't have a direct living memory of Joe McCarthy. It's before my time. I think all of our times, but it's when is that going to happen? What will it take for a Joe McCarthy moment where a senator responds, "Have you no decency, sir?"
That's right.
And the momentum, the air is let out of the bubble. And it's different now. There's something different. There have been several, all the way back to getting off the bus with Billy Bush talking about grabbing him by the you-know-what, all the way back to that. We thought we would have a Joe McCarthy moment all along. January 6th, certainly this guy is done. It looked, we got close to impeaching him and disqualifying him for ever holding office again. Didn't do it, didn't happen. And so now, when is the Joe McCarthy moment? I've stopped predicting it, but we're at a point where when it comes, it will be a surprise and it will be very fast for everyone. Will it be the 2026 elections, or will it be before that? Will it be this summer? Will it be a disaster that befalls Florida, say a hurricane, or the Gulf Coast, and something pushes it over the top of the hill? But right now, we're not there yet. We're still rolling this thing uphill, trying to just even understand why a close to half of the country and what turns out to be a majority, and polls still say it would be a majority of the electoral college voters, people who would likely vote. What would they vote? How would they vote? Would they vote? He would still win the election today against Kamala Harris. That is
how much,
astonishing to me.
Stuart, do you feel that the shooting that almost got Donald Trump, how important do you think that was to the
Yes,
outcome of
that's
the
a
election?
very interesting point, and I pondered it. And it's I got some insight on that in Houston this week, where I'm visiting. There, the radio has about 4 or 5 channels that are nothing but Christian broadcasters, evangelical Christian broadcasters. I drove past the Joel and Victoria Orstein Victory Church, which looks like exactly like a corporate brother to all the private businesses and corporate headquarters that are around it. It's a very big, impressive structure. But back to the radio, there's a what they're saying out there is that we are in the end times, and there's a whole narrative that we're not paying attention to, that this is all preordained and we are looking, the destruction is coming, and we just have to sit back and wait to be lifted up out of it by divine providence. And they really believe it. And I think the shooting reinforced that for some people, a lot of people.
And then the conspiracy theories abounded that it was a plot by the Democrats. In addition, of course they did. We'd be surprised if they didn't. I do feel it was a factor in his success, and people don't necessarily behave rationally. A perfect example is there's one shark attack in a year maybe, and that keeps a lot of people away from the beach and out of the water. Just one, but it's not rational.
One of the things
Statistics be
about the shooting,
damned. Hmm?
a detail about the shooting that was borderline conspiracy theory, is that there were reports from people on the scene who saw this guy shimmying up the roof and tried to report it. And here we have a communication problem. I think there's been speculations that the Secret Service simply ignored that, hoping that their problem would be taken care of by this guy. That's the conspiracy theory. I think it's the point you made earlier, Sandy. It's communication. The fact that this guy's shimmying up the roof, people are seeing it. There was no effective way for the beat cop or the secondary security personnel to get that information, Secret Service, in time to prevent him from taking his actions. It's also very interesting how that even after the immense amount of money, resources, study was put into presidential security after the assassinations in the 60s and 70s, all the way up through Ronald Reagan assassinations and attempts. How did this happen?
Which is another issue.
That's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
But I don't subscribe to the conspiracist. I think it was
good.
Yeah, I mean, every single note that I've ever seen, everything I've ever seen about that kid, he was gonna do something, no matter who it was. It didn't matter who it was. He wasn't targeting any particular political person. He wanted to make a name, and he was just that kid had issues without question. But we're dealing with a whole set of issues here. But
I can. Hey, you go on, Rudy.
I was just
I'll
going
be
to
after
mention
you.
that beyond waiting for what I think is going to be the inevitable fall but when the inevitable fall comes, it's going to be so costly that it's just the waiting part is so sad. But beyond just waiting for the inevitable fall, I think we also have to have a plan. There's still no, from the other side or from any side or from anyone, there's still no comprehensive, cohesive look. Here's where we need to be. Here's what we need to try. And I don't know if people are just again waiting for the inevitable fall or just waiting for them to self-implode. But it would sure be helpful if the other side would cohese a message.
Might I suggest a strongly worded letter, as Chuck Schumer did? That's where we are right now.
That's it.
That's where a lot of them are right now. How I give AOC and Bernie Sanders a lot of credit for taking this tour around the country, assembling these crowds and talking about oligarchy and authoritarianism, not mincing words. The representative from Houston, Jasmine Crockett, another one, absolutely speaking out unabashedly about what's going on, directly to Marjorie Taylor Greene, in her committee hearings. So there are some voices, but there's that traditional or inherent democratic reluctance to alienate the center. And a whole other area of study could be, where is the center and what constitutes a moderate today? That Overton window, the area of serious consideration of an issue, has been shifted so far to the right that what was considered a moderate stance today is now radical left. And in the perception of the mainstream media, and even through the New York Times and Washington Post, they will talk about things as fringe theories that were somewhere close to the mainstream. It was still looking at Medicare for all, which every other, industrialized country, every single one of them has some kind of national guarantee that you can get healthcare if you need it. We're still talking about that as a far left or a left concept. So,
agreed.
Well, Bernie was on Colbert last night, and I loved his line. He said, it's no longer, of course, of the people, by the people, for the people. It's of the oligarchy, for the oligarchy, and by the oligarchy.
Yeah, that
and to even give that even a fleeting thought is terrifying to someone like me. I'm a cusp baby in terms of I'm the last year of the baby boomers, so I grew up with the greatest generation, and I grew up as a baby boomer, so I have that great connection to all those great folks back then. And to even have these conversations and think about my grandfather, who guarded the Enola Gay, as a Marine before it took off, and to know how patriotic he was and what he would do in these times, the voice that he would have in these times is, it's mind-boggling to me. So, so we have to do whatever we can. It's going to take people hitting the streets. It's going to take anger, and I just hope it doesn't take so long that it's so costly that it's so that it's gets that ugly.
Let's return to that academic paper I cited a couple of episodes back. It just takes 3.5% of the population to become actively involved in order to format a movement that can be successful. It's not half, it's not a quarter, just 3.5%.
Well, with Trump, it might be 0.0099.
No, we're already
anybody, any little mouse, anybody speaks up.
No. We're already over 1.5% of people in the active resistance I'm talking about.
Cheers.
We're already over 1.5%, and we're moving. I think with each successive outrage that we see, it moves another block of people into that window. And I also think it's with the incomprehensible in terms of what motivates them to take these actions that harm people in blue or red states. You're really shooting yourself in the foot when you're alienating those people. They're the ones who put you in office. They're the ones who showed up for January 6th. You did them a solid by pardoning all their heroes. That was then. But what you're doing now, the tariffs, with the cuts to hospitals and healthcare, you're not doing yourself any favors there. And I
And
think those cumulatively, not as glamorous, not as newsworthy, but that is moving the needle towards where there may be effective action.
and here's this reconciliation bill, which I spelled WRECK, and then the rest of it. But the point is, this reconciliation bill, it's going to make all the tax cuts permanent that added so much more money to the debt. So this is just writing a
Yeah.
check for the debt to
Well,
add to it. So everybody is, yeah, we've got what about, last I heard was some $600 billion in tax cuts for the top 1% of the earners. And that's being fueled and funded by cutting FEMA, by cutting the hospitals, by
Rudy,
cutting, and not even being funded. It's not even being touched, but they're doing it and saying that's what we're doing.
Rudy, you know deficits don't matter. You know that, right? Do you know who said that? You know who said that? It was Vice
Let's
President
think.
Dick Cheney said that.
That's great.
Dick Cheney said deficits don't matter. It's on record. They don't want to trust the deficits. They don't want to trust their wisdom in deficits when it's their deficit.
Right.
And of course, you look at the boring macroeconomic charts from Paul Krugman and all those people.
Right.
They show that the deficits dropped in the Democratic administrations, and the Republicans,
Every time.
of course, of course, we set it up to do that, when we were in there. But that's not the case. They run up the deficit. Reagan did it. The Bushes did it.
Buddy.
And, who had the balanced budget? Who had the balanced budget?
I've been saying that all my life. My entire adult life, every president of my adult life. So that would start out just around Reagan. I mean, my adult life. So every Republican president, and this is just the fact, every Republican president in my lifetime has left the economy a disaster. Reagan left Iran-Contra and everything else, and he left it a disaster for Bush. The reason that the economy was such a disaster under the end of Reagan is why Bush was a one-term president, and we ended up with the next guy. And the next guy didn't do us any favors, in my humble opinion. But anyway, so then every Republican after that, and the best economies were after Democrats. It's just, that is, look it up. I know that doesn't mean anything anymore, but look it up. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
It's sad. It's sad. I mean, it's the economy's stupid, but when you look at the economy stupid, it's not, you don't have to be stupid to figure it out.
Speaking of which, that's sort of a side hobby I have, is watching James Carville, who is sort of ventured into, I don't give an F, grandpa territory in what he says, and then watching the reaction is interesting to see. There are two reactions. It's we shouldn't be listening to a guy who hasn't won an election in 40 years for a candidate. And if he had been one of FDR's someone in 1932 making commentary about FDR, it would be Grover Cleveland's administration and candidacy that Carville would have been a participant in. So I understand that criticism, but he also makes a lot of good points about some obvious shootings of the foot that the Democrats could avoid doing that they're not, because they're not heeding the voice of experience, and yes. Carville is the voice of experience. So I don't take everything he says as gospel, but I do watch his podcasts, and he has some interesting things to say.
No doubt. No question about it. I remember one time I was walking out of the CVS on Britannia Street, and he was walking out, and this is when I still was doing the levy. And I introduced myself. I'd never met him, and I wrote a story about him, and he quoted the first 3 paragraphs to me verbatim.
Wow, that's great.
Flattering and
Blew
impressive.
my mind. I don't care what you think.
Intimidating.
I don't care what you think of a person. Anybody with a memory like that, forget about it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was interesting. But no, I love to hear what he has to say. I love to hear what everybody has to say. But then, you take a step back and you mull it over, and then you come back with a reasoned response. But none of that. There's reason is out the window. We are flying by the seat of our pants, folks, and we're getting pebble burns, and it's just going to get worse because the stones are getting bigger.
Rudy makes a good point when he says these institutions are being, brought down. It's going to be difficult to just bring them back. And it's comparing it to a house. It takes a long time to build a house, but you can burn it down in a couple of hours. So the sooner this stops, better. And I also love, Rudy, when you point out you read everything. That's good. You're reading everything. You're not reading just as
Yeah.
tempting as it is,
Yeah.
the things you want to hear. I
Hmm.
wish everybody was doing that.
Hmm.
It concerns me that there's a glob of people out there, a big group of people that no matter what our current president does, it doesn't matter because they believe in him for a reason I'm not sure I quite understand, but whatever it is, there's nothing you can do to alienate them. Hopefully that glob of people is shrinking. Hopefully it's getting smaller. I feel it is.
I hope
That,
so.
that's what these
I hope.
that's
Yeah.
what these successive disasters and impositions of national policies that affect people, those people in that electoral block that put him in office. I think it is affecting them chunk by chunk, quietly but definitively.
But I think they're looking every single time. I think those numbers start to go down, just like you're saying, Stuart. I think every time he does anything, any little thing that maybe might portend he might be doing something okay, then it shoots back up like 5, 6 points. And then it'll take like another 6 months to come down like a half a point every 3 weeks or something like that. It's like a very
Yeah,
bad blood pressure machine.
and if I could go back to the point about what Sandy was making, and both of you were making actually, about reading everything. I was on Blue Sky, and there was a reaction. It was Dan Frumkin, the old Washington Post White House correspondent, who has a post Washington Post column. He was saying that he was objecting to the uh, questioning of Joe Biden's competency by Jake Tapper, and then the chorus of Blue Sky users joined in, saying, Tapper's really doing us a disservice, and we shouldn't be relitigating Joe Biden, and the Democrats need. Joe Biden was a great president. He accomplished a lot. He did a lot of good things. And there was very little in the way of, but he did lose the election, and the debate truly was a disaster, and he really was avoiding the press and not being forward about his condition. And these are my observations, and if I went on there and posted that, I would be excoriated. And
Mm.
I see both sides of it. Would I take Biden today? Absolutely. I saw one piece that's not substantiated, but that his staff was contemplating putting him in a wheelchair as soon as he won the election, if he was reelected,
Wow.
that he needed to be in a wheelchair to avoid these stumbles and falls when he was being
Wow.
transported between places. And of course, as a second-term president, under the old rules at least, he wouldn't. That wouldn't matter. He'd still be president. So, given all that, yeah. So what? He's in a wheelchair. FDR was in a wheelchair. So what? Governor of this state is in a wheelchair where I'm sitting right now. So, yeah,
Well, that didn't work out so well.
no, it didn't. Well, he's effective though. I'm talking about his
It's true. There
efficacy.
you go.
That he's doing what some of his voters want, and that gets back to the larger point about the president. If you take a trip across the country, get off the interstate, drive on the U.S. highway or the local highway, pass through the center of town after town after town, everything from places like Opelousas, Louisiana, to Wichita, Kansas, or you go all around, you go through these towns, there are these hollowed out downtowns. There is a huge problem with fentanyl and drug abuse and meth and hopelessness and unemployment that the urban communities don't understand. And I think the electoral bloc that pushed this guy back into office is rooted in that desperation. And they are happy to see him tear it all down because they perceive that they've not seen any benefit from it. I would challenge that and say, you really don't understand the difference between having a poorly staffed and crowded emergency room and a boarded up an emergency room. There's a difference that you're not appreciating there. But I understand that there's still a large block that believes we need to tear it all down. And there is a significant block, it's not certainly not a majority, but it's the end times people who think, well, this is just, doesn't matter what we do. These are the end times. And the shot across the ear proved it. So they're not going to change their minds. So those are two sort of watery or weakly supported explanations that I carry around.
And they all tend to forget that the reason why they're allowed to have those thoughts is because they live in this country.
Right here.
Excellent point. Excellent point, Rudy. Absolutely.
Well, that's
Folks.
a great note. Is there, as we're about run out of time, Rudy, is there anything you want to mention or you won't get to sleep tonight?
No, I was going to get it. I was just going to tear into the Diddy trial and just do it because I've been watching it 24/7. That's all I do is watch Diddy. So, but nope. I'll spare you.
But that would make another show, very soon.
Cheers.
How long is this trial supposed to last?
I don't know.
It could go on. Like, remember the O.J. Simpson trial?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be quite the reaction, but we'll see.
Yeah, probably not. So, and the same with you, Stuart. Is there any one last thing you wanted to mention, or you won't get to sleep tonight?
We won't go into it, but emoluments, which before my brother, an attorney, my late brother, explained the emoluments is a clause in the Constitution about gifts to the president that could be construed as bribery, and that's going to bring this guy down. Apparently not. $400 million jet. Apparently not.
Apparently not.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. And then, of course, if you come down south and you talk about emoluments, they just think they're trying to take down their Civil War statues. So we got that on top of that, on top of that, on top of that.
Well, I think we covered a lot today. I love the
Cheers.
way Rudy pointed out that many of these people that are so unhappy tend to forget the country that we live in, that they can at least express their unhappiness without serious repercussions. There's been a little bit throughout the country, but it's been highly publicized and highly denounced, and which as it should be. So, well, with that, we are going to conclude today's episode of The Slingshot from levees.org. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Rudy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sammy.
And thank you, the listeners, for joining us today. I hope you liked this episode, and be sure to like, subscribe, and rate the podcast on all of your favorite platforms. Thanks so much. See you next time.